Welcome back to Stripe Dev Live. Wait, no, this is Dev Chats. Um, welcome back, everybody, to Dev Chats. Today we have Mike Bill Foucault and Charlie Gerard, and we're going to be jamming with the JamStack. So before we hop into it and talk about all the cool updates, I'd like to do some introductions because we have two of the newest members of the developer advocacy team here with us. So let's see, Charlie, how about you go first?
Sure. So I'm Charlie Gerard. I'm a dev advocate at Stripe, as you just said. But yeah, so on the side, I'm also a Google developer expert in web technologies. I also wrote a book about TensorFlow.js, and basically I just love technology. And on the side, when I have some free time, I love to do some research and explore all the technologies that I don't get to play with at work. But yeah, and before Stripe, I was at Netlify, so I have a bit of context about the JamStack, and I'm excited to share some knowledge and just talk about this today.
Awesome. And you, Mike?
Hey, yeah, thanks, Charles. So my name is Mike Bifulco. I am also on the advocacy team here. I've been at Stripe for a couple of months now. I live in North Carolina in Charlotte, and I'm something of a front-end developer, recovering entrepreneur, forever entrepreneur creator kind of thing. I'm come to Stripe by way of Google. I was working on the Google Assistant developer advocacy team. And a past life before that, I was running a code school called Gymnasium, and I worked for Microsoft before that.
Awesome. So, as promised, we do have some updates for you, and there are so many updates. So, I'm just going to go ahead here and share my screen. I need to get like two monitors. I have one. So, we're going to go into this recursive little thing here. Please bear with me. All right. So, to kick things off, we have MarkDoc. Now, actually, Charlie was the developer advocate that kind of shepherded this one to its release, but MarkDoc is a powerful, flexible Markdown-based authoring framework. If you've ever wondered how does Stripe build the docs, MarkDoc is the technology that powers it. It's incredibly awesome. Charlie has a really cool video just introducing MarkDoc on our channel. You should definitely check it out. In addition to that, one of our newest payment methods, US bank accounts or ACH direct debit, has shipped. If you want to check that out, you can learn more about it on the channel or in the docs. There's an excellent live stream with CJ and Matt based in Dublin. Direct debit's a really great payment method if you have like larger transactions or for example, if you have recurring transactions as well, because the payment failure rates tend to be lower. In addition to that, Stripe Link is now generally available. If you'd like to learn more about Stripe Link, you are able to check that out as well with a video with my colleague CJ here. And then finally, Stripe Terminal is generally available in a lot of different places, and it also recently shipped a Terminal API-only server-driven integration. So if you've ever wanted to build an in-person payments experience, you can do that with Stripe Terminal. If you're curious as to how to actually build out a server-driven integration, you can actually check out our latest sample on just building out things with Terminal. So definitely check that out. And I think as a bonus, actually, there's one last thing that we shipped, and that's the Stripe data pipeline. This allows you to take all of your Stripe data that you have in your account and push it to your favorite database. As you can see, we have Snowflake. We also have Redshift. So if you're so inclined to do analysis on your different accounts and different charges and things of that nature, definitely check out the Stripe data pipeline. Okay. So with that being said, let's get started talking about JamStack. And I think the natural place to start, as someone who myself, I am not necessarily a front-end dev, is just, what is JamStack? Like, what does it even stand for?
All right.
Charlie, I think you may be best suited to start with this one.
So the Jam in JamStack stands for JavaScript API and markup. So it's usually it's more of like an architecture that kind of relies on pre-generating your assets and rendering that like at the CDN level, and to add interactivity or things to your website, you use everything. You use APIs. So it's like a way of decoupling your backend and your front end, so that your backend can use different tools or different frameworks or whatever, and like completely different from your front end. And the way that these two communicates is through APIs. So if you do have a server-side, custom one, or if you use other services, everything is actually fed to the front end via APIs, which allow you to do like a lot of different things. But there's a few benefits to the JamStack. Well, I don't know if we want to start going into this right now, or if we want to do it throughout the conversations. But I don't know, Mike, if you want to add something to that kind of brief definition of the JamStack.
Yeah, one of the things that we've found in some of our discussions about sort of what the JamStack is that if you're a developer on the web in the past few years, you've very likely bumped into it, or maybe even built something with it, possibly without knowing it, because some of these frameworks don't put JamStack in front of their name as kind of a first bit of marketing. So, there's a list a mile long of sort of JamStack-based stuff, but things that fall in that sort of descriptor is Next.js and Gatsby and Eleventy and Jekyll. Jekyll's not really JavaScript, that's Ruby. All kinds of sort of static site generators that kind of fit into this architecture. And it's really just a rough shape of things that I think, generally speaking, has enabled people who used to just be front-end developers to be a lot more dangerous in some respects, but also like make entire products with just sort of the one foundational technologies that they know.
Awesome. So it stands for JavaScript, APIs, Markdown. Those all sound like things that we've been like using forever. So like, I guess it's a stack, right? Or is it just like, is it also just thinking about those things like differently? Because I swear I've been using JavaScript and APIs and Markdown for as long as I've been making apps. But this JamStack thing seems to have cropped up over the last few years. Is there some type of philosophy that makes it different from, I guess, what developers probably feel like they've been doing before?
I think, as Mike was saying, it kind of gives a lot more power to front-end developers. It means that now you can do a bit of like kind of server-side stuff, but using serverless functions. So they're still part of your front-end app. You don't actually have to write any server-side code using like Node.js, but with serverless functions that are usually used a lot in JamStack applications, that kind of allows you to unlock some server-side features as a front-end developer. So for me, when I started working on Netlify as well, I was thinking the same thing. I think I've been doing JamStack for a while. But when I was writing some server-side code, I had never really used serverless functions before. I used to write Node.js and spin up my own, little servers when I wanted to do something like this. But now with APIs and serverless function, I think you can really build complex applications with that architecture, with only the front-end knowledge that you have. So I like that kind of that way of having access to kind of like more of the technology, or you have more power as a front-end dev. But then it's about balancing. It's not because you can that you should, but that's like in other, it's like a context-specific thing. But to me, that would be kind of like the main difference. Is I've been a front-end dev for a while, but serverless function, I had not really used that before. And I think that even though I was only doing front-end separated from backend, I was still kind of tied to, CI/CD pipelines that were coupled with the backend in my previous jobs and things like that. It wasn't really that separated where it could be completely independent. So these are maybe like two things that I think to me were quite different. There's probably more examples as well, but yeah.
Yeah, there's kind of been an interesting history that's happened over the past, I want to say 6 or 7 years. I don't really know when JamStack was kind of coined and came into existence. But I will say in my life, at least the pre-JamStack era for me really meant that like, I can build you a beautiful front end for something, but like, Charles, I'm going to need you to go find someone to build me an API and set up a database and write SQL queries and do migrations and all those things that like I really don't like to think about. I need someone to go build that and do that for me. And we've kind of entered a world where there's database platforms as a service and APIs that can go and make functionalities and do things like collect payments and spin up newsletters and things like that. And so we went from like, I need a backend and a middleware team to go build me stuff that I can plug into and make it look nice and presentable for users, to suddenly the first notion of JamStack that I sort of heard was, we're going to generate an entire site by creating templates for what the whole site will look like in JavaScript, run a big batch job that'll do sort of a server side, static site generator thing, a lot like Jekyll and some of these other things that have already existed. It'll go generate the whole site, and then I don't have to think about what the web server looks like or what the hosting looks like for it. There are services built specifically for that. And that was kind of in an era where if you were just a JavaScript developer at the time, you were probably building single page apps, which were very, very heavy JavaScript apps that loaded many times the entire application at once. And you'd be pulling down, 9, 10, 15 megabytes of JavaScript to show just one page because it represented everything your application could do. JamStack brought some of that back into like, let's use some of the healthier parts of the HTTP lifecycle to load pages, just the thing you need on the page, and to split it up into multiple pages that are more SEO friendly and things like that. And as it's matured even further, you get all these really cool things like running on the edge of the network and splitting out bundles that compile on the server and things that happen on the client side, and they mesh together really nicely. And they're starting to use web standards more normally and naturally in ways that are sort of empowering everyone. It's a pretty deep topic, and I think there's probably people who are better suited to comment on it than me, but that's kind of been my experience with it over the years.
Oh, that's super cool. So it sounds like we might have had like a kind of a JamStack conversation here before. A few weeks ago, we had Luke Edwards from Cloudflare come and tell us all about Cloudflare pages and Cloudflare workers. And one of the things that really struck me was like, one, it's so simple. And tell me if this is not JamStack. It's so simple how he can just throw up like a folder of HTML files or his disk folder or whatever from whatever generated his templates. And that's like a site, right? Yeah. And then you just have these functions that are on the edge, and his site is just calling those functions, and that's the entire application. That's it. That's JamStack. Oh goodness. Well, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering,
it's a far cry from having to go and log into an FTP server and upload some files and hope that you've configured your PHP stuff.
No. Throw some holy water on it. Oh gosh, that's terrible. So speaking of like kind of CI/CD, I think I might have talked a little bit about the experience, but what I just discussed of just like, okay, here are your static files. I'm gonna throw them on Cloudflare. I'm gonna throw them, I don't know, I guess anywhere, right? You put it anywhere you can store stuff for the most part, and host it there. Is that kind of the experience of deploying a JamStack application? What does that look like in your experience?
Yeah, there's a surprising amount of options there. And I think the idea is that it's friendly based on how deep you want to get involved in sort of the development process. So it can be as easy as drag and drop a zip file of folders onto your hosting provider, and they'll go spin up a service from that. Once you're a little more comfortable with that, instead of having this folder that you upload every time, you could even set up something like Dropbox to deploy to some of the various hosting providers for these JamStack things. And the growth from there is to pipe into something like a GitHub repo, where every time you commit to GitHub, it goes and rebuilds your site automatically through Cloudflare or Vercel or Netlify or Render or any of these services that'll go and parse your whole site, generate it, put it up live on the web, and for every commit in your project, suddenly you have a version of your site that's built that you can move back and forward through and plug into the normal CI things. Like you can run testing on it to make sure your UI looks like it does with snapshot testing and things like that. And if you need to roll it back, you can do that with the click of a button, as opposed to having to go and wait for everything to build, because all of the builds of your site throughout time exist, and you can go back and forward through them, almost like a DVR of your site's existence.
Totally. And Charlie, is that true of Netlify as well? I know you worked there, and
yeah. I mean, what Mike said is true. Like, because Netlify is built on Netlify, so I was basically using Netlify all day, every day. And yeah, so you push your changes, and you have an integration on GitHub, and it detects that, and it spins up a build automatically. And I really did like this idea of like immutable deploy. So it means that it was generating a deploy preview every time that it was running. And it means that you can share that link if you're working with, I don't know, clients or other colleagues. You can share that link, or they can just even check your PR and they'll have access to the link. And usually that, depending on how you set up your stuff, that's supposed to be an environment that is almost really identical to prod, so you can have some confidence that it will be working, and you don't actually have to set up anything like net. Vercel probably does it as well. I haven't used it as much, but it's you can focus on coding and not having to think about the infrastructure at all. You can just do the job that you're supposed to do, which is coding and build the app. And with the deploy previews, you can have people giving you feedback on something that looks like what prod should look like. And the fact that it's immutable means that you can run some kind of A/B testing quite easily as well, because these URLs are kind of like available forever. I don't know if Vercel keeps them forever. I know that Netlify for a while kept everything forever. So you can go back to like the very, very early version of the Netlify site if you can find it. But yeah, so that the fact that you always had access to this meant that as Max said, when you want to roll back, it's about finding the previous URL and just replacing it. So instead of pointing, it basically would mean that the live site points to the previous deploy preview, and here you go. You can deploy on Friday at 5 p.m. You don't care anymore. So, yeah.
That sounds.
It's a really powerful concept to have a pull request. Like when you open a pull request, it spins up an entire environment that's your entire application start to finish. That is completely separate from every other one that's ever existed, which you can share with colleagues. You can do all the things you would do on a pull request, leave comments, ask people to make changes, add commits, and it'll deploy a new version of that to a separate URL that doesn't affect your production site. I'm sure all of us have lived in engineering environments where you used to have to create a pull request that would have to go get built on a test server. That would be the one and only test server running the one and only version of this thing while someone reviewed it, and it'd have to get the blessing from on high to go get promoted to whatever branch was then collected into a release sometime later. And all this really strange conflagration of things that we created to make deployments easier that was before this kind of paradigm shift happened, where you can do many builds in many environments that kind of exist alongside each other.
Oh, all of this sounds incredibly awesome. I think, I want to see what it looks like. So I think either one of you both have done some projects. So which one of you would like to go first? Mike, would you like to share one of the
sure
projects that
I'll fire away. While I'm sharing my screen out here too, one of the things I don't think we mentioned is that a lot of the stuff we're talking about, like you can go and test out and try and play around with for free. Like you don't need to go spin up an enterprise account somewhere and pay hundreds of dollars a month if you're working on a project that's a pet project. A lot of these services have super generous free tiers where you can go and spin up something and get tons of traffic on it before you really need to think about upping to a paid tier. So it's worth testing this stuff out and playing around with it. I've shared out a window here. This is APIs You Won't Hate. APIs You Won't Hate is a developer community. It's a website at apisyouwon'thate.com, built and run by sort of the community itself. So we have lots of really smart API developers who have their own sort of experience building things on the web. And this is a site that's built on the JamStack. This one is actually built with Next.js. And it has been built in several different frameworks over the years. I kind of use this as a place every time I want to learn a new framework. I'll start a branch and rebuild APIs You Won't Hate on something else. So it was Gatsby before Next, and I've played around with other versions in the past too. Long story short, this site is powered by lots of markdown files that represent each one of these articles and pages. We've got sort of featured articles at the top. We have a couple of books that we've produced and sell. We have a podcast, and all of the stuff that's pulled onto this page is built using relatively simple React-flavored templates, using APIs to call. This embed comes from Transistor. and is something that is built using all the concepts that we talked about before. I think the interesting thing to talk about for the purpose of this discussion is so that we talked about the markup side of this, the JavaScript side is the React part. The APIs thing is a little bit underspoken for in the world of JamStack. And really the point I want to get across here is that you probably heard about some of these things as static site generators, right? Gatsby is a static site generator, 11D, whatever it may be. The static and static site generator doesn't mean that the content on it is static or that the functionality of the site is static. It can do lots of things. And really anything you can dream up with APIs available on the web with JavaScript code that you can connect to it, you can do. A very simple example of that on this APIs You Won't Hate site is we have this contact form, which allows you to send us a question. We answer questions occasionally on our podcast. We'll do an episode where we do an entire Q&A. And what this form is a simple HTML form. It submits the form basically through a serverless function that's spun up by the Next repo that is behind the site. And that is kind of the magic, is that when you deploy one of these sites to with Next or with Gatsby or whatever it may be, they all have their own version of serverless functions, which means that you are able to have a serverless server component that does the thinking that you would want to do with a traditional server. So concretely, in this case, that means that to submit our newsletter, there are things we need to do on the server side that we shouldn't share with the public, like API keys and things like that go submit to the newsletter. And what this does is it separates those two concerns. So all the server-y stuff happens on the server. You have access to environment variables. You can do all of that. You can submit questions, and they'll all come through as you would expect. I'm going to switch screens here real quick and share out some code if I can get it to come up quickly enough.
Yeah, and while you're doing it, we got a question from Don Felix. And Don asked, hello, I love how you guys... Actually, it's not a question, it's a comment. Thanks, Don. I appreciate
that's
that.
not bad. Thanks,
I thought you
Don.
were going to ask how we're articulating JamStack, but hey, sounds like we're doing a good job here.
Yeah, not to toot our own horns or anything.
Right? Not to toot our own, not to pat ourselves on the back. I'm not doing anything, guys. Here, it's YouTube. So
I'm not going to go too deep into the code here, but this is the AMA page that we were just looking at, the contact form for this. What it does when you submit the form and this handle submit function is it sends a fetch request to /API/contact with the body of the form included, encoded as a typical, with a content type header here. And this is kind of where we're connecting the client side of the app to the serverless or server side of the app. And if I go over to API contact, that's this page here. And what this actually does is a couple of different things. But in our case, we're submitting just an entry into an Airtable table, I guess you would say, into an Airtable. And what it does is this function just handles that request. First, it makes sure you're sending a post request, because if you're not sending a post, you're using this API incorrectly. It grabs the body from this thing and spits it into this Airtable thing. And then in the back end, there's a bunch of connections we've done with Airtable and webhooks to notify the team that we got a contact. So it dispatches an email. It sends a notification on our Slack for APIs You Won't Hate to the team behind the podcast. And that's kind of all there is to it. But the important thing here is that, there's some of this stuff that happens, like a form name that we're able to have on this side. We have an Airtable ID that comes from an environment variable, and an API key that comes from an environment variable that we don't want to share on the client side, because anyone with that API key can go and do potentially malicious things, fill this Airtable with a bunch of junk or whatever the case may be. So it's super easy to do and is a very, very small function that we're not maintaining a running server all the time to use. This function gets invoked when someone submits the form. The JavaScript sort of activates the serverless function for a very small amount of time. It fires up this code, sends the requests, does all the things that I'm telling it to do, and then that serverless function spins down. So there's virtually no cost to run this thing, and it provides us with a great bit of functionality we can use to stay in touch with our audience.
So I'm guessing, okay, so that's pretty interesting. So it's actually, not only is it easier, the developer experience is a little bit better, but it sounds like this is also, JamStack is also a pretty cheap way to deploy and build apps as well. So
yeah, it can be potentially, because this is running in the background on someone's serverless thing, so probably AWS Lambda or some other peer's version of that, and you're paying essentially for execution time. And like I said before, there's often very generous free tiers. What you'll not see in any of this is that there's no code in here that's going and configuring a serverless function. We're not doing anything like standing up a server, an express server to handle requests or anything like that. And in the case of a Next app, that's all sort of wired across by this file structure. So anything under pages/API becomes a serverless function. And there's a specific sort of handler function that you need to export to actually handle that request as a serverless function. But I'm not doing any configuration. There's very, very little you need to do to actually make this the sort of magical bit that spins up on request and does whatever you need to go and submit the form.
I don't know if you mentioned, Mike, I mean, sorry if you mentioned it already, but I think to me, the one of the most exciting thing about serverless functions as well is that they're framework agnostic. So at the moment, your website is in Next.js, but it means that if tomorrow, I don't know, you work with a team who doesn't know Next and then want to use, I don't know, Angular or something else, you could just extract that file and put it in an Angular app. And because what it exposes is an API endpoint, you don't have to rewrite any of that logic. Or even if you wanted to share that logic with somebody else, you just send them that file and then they ping it, and you don't have to rewrite any of that logic. So to me, that's why sometimes a lot of the things I like to put them in serverless functions, so they can be shared across like services, depending on how you architecture your app. But to me, that was really one of the things that I found pretty powerful as well. So I know that you can write them in JavaScript, depending on what platform you use. I think they can also be written in TypeScript, and I think maybe Go, but I don't remember because I never wrote Go. But it means that if you want to use a tool that is not part of the JavaScript ecosystem, but that is part of another language, there are a couple of other languages that you can write your serverless functions in as well. So I found that super powerful, that even though you're a JavaScript developer, you can use some kind of like server-side, more specific Node.js packages in serverless functions to add functionality to your app as well.
Yeah, that's right. And there's definitely cases where you might want to use one language versus the other, depending on your familiarity or the team you're working with. It may be that your middleware team is a Go team, or that they prefer TypeScript or something like that. I'm sort of notoriously stubbornly in the just plain old JavaScript world and haven't done much with TypeScript. A lot of people, retch at me for that these days. But yeah, that's really nice. The other side of it too is, because it's built on a fairly simple framework too, like this can be lifted from hosting provider to hosting provider. I don't really know for sure that it's running on AWS. In this case, it probably is, but it could be lifted and moved over to Azure's serverless functions or Google's or anyone else who provides it. In the end, it doesn't really matter, because there's the implementation isn't tied to the configuration here.
That's really neat. That's really neat. And I think, Charlie has also done a good amount of JamStack projects as well. And I think you also had something that you wanted to share.
So there's maybe a couple of things I wanted to share. Wait, I'm going to share the link before I share my screen. Wait, how do I share the link? Do I not have access to I can't write comments. If I send you a comment, Charles, can you post it? Oh, wait, you're muted.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, wait. I don't know if that works if I send you that. I don't have the YouTube channel in front of me. But if I share, but I don't want to share my whole screen. Oh, dear. Am I going to share my whole laptop?
No, it'll give you an option to share a window when you hit share screen.
Yeah.
It's not going to... This is too many things, way too many things. Okay, so I think I have it. All right. If there's people watching, if you visit the URL that I just sent, there should be, I don't know what's going to happen because I just tried it. But so do you see that my screen or not?
I don't quite see your screen yet.
Okay. I think I'm having issues. Well,
I could share my screen, or perhaps Mike. Let's see.
Yeah, it's not working.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if somebody else wants to share the screen with the link that I shared, then
Sure.
basically I wanted to talk about real-time multi-user experiences, which is something that historically was not really that possible on the JamStack. Yay! Also, there's no multiplayer. Oh, see, yeah, look. Hee. Okay, so I don't know what's going on there, but that's supposed to be 2 people or more, or I don't know what I did, but I did something. So is this multiple people or is it just me?
No, I'm in here. I'm clicking around.
I'm like, am I playing by myself? I don't know, but yeah. So this is just one of the examples of a tool called Croquet that allows you to do real-time experiences like multiplayer things on the JamStack. So if you've ever done real-time multi-user applications before, you hopefully find out quite amazing that you can do it without needing a server, because I've done some of these things before using socket.io, but that usually requires you to spin up a Node.js server. There's probably a lot of other tools out there, but I haven't used them. So I only know socket.io, where you have to spin up a simple Node.js server, and then you kind of handle all the users' connections from the server, and you stream events back to all the clients connected. And using Croquet, you can actually do that on the JamStack. So again, as a front-end developer, you can handle that kind of like multi-user experiences all in the front end without needing to do any backend code at all. So this is just one example of a game, but they've kind of changed their strategy. So I couldn't find the example that I was looking at before, but it was kind of a clone of Figma, where, if you're designing on Figma, if you've used Figma before, every time that there's a user, you can kind of like follow them around and see what they're looking at. And that's the kind of experiences that you could create on the JamStack as well, which personally I found super exciting, because it's like when I was building experiments using WebSockets, I couldn't actually host it on Netlify because it required a server. So it means that any kind of JamStack platform, I was not able to actually leverage them, and I had to find another way to host my apps. So that was a little bit annoying, because I just liked to use Netlify. A lot of the things are free. So if I'm just building my side projects, I want it to be free. I don't really want to pay for it. So that was just like one of the examples. Like I can close it now. But another thing that I wanted to show, and Charles, I might need you to share the link as well.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So and that you can stop sharing your screen, because I think.
Sure.
By the way, thank you for sharing your screen. I should have checked before if I could do it. But it's doing some IoT on the JamStack as well. So that requires a little bit of like a hacky setup. But it's like you're using only your front-end skills. You can find kind of hacks and ways to make other things work. Because when I've done a lot of IoT projects in the past as well, again, most of the time you needed a Node.js server, and you needed JavaScript tools like Johnny5 if you wanted to control an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi. But now with the Philips Hue API, you can actually trigger your lights. But the way that it usually works is that as they're on your home network, you can use it like on the JamStack in a serverless function at home, but then there's like little hacks that you can go around to actually expose that URL to the world. Because if you only do it in a serverless function at home, once it's deployed, well, AWS does not have access to your home like network. So yeah, there's like just little hacks that you can also do IoT experiments in the JamStack as well. So yeah, I just created like a little app where if I click on green, then it turns green and red and purple. So yeah, it's like an experiment again, but it's if you had told me a year ago that IoT and JamStack, usually I would not put them together at all, but with the API economy again, Philips having exposed an API to control your lights, you can do that on your home network pretty easily without having to deploy your app. But if you want to deploy it, you can play around with like a Raspberry Pi and expose a few different things pretty easily as well. You don't have to realize that, oh my God, I need to learn Node.js or anything. you just ping an API and you have lights that change color.
That's incredible. So hold on just a minute. So we have this site here, control Charlie's lights.netlify.app. It's in the chat here. Hold on, let me just, this site right here. And if you click on one of those colors, it will change Charlie's lights in real time. I need somebody that's watching to change it to, I don't know, red or green or something.
But I think am I hidden behind the link?
Oh, you're it's a good point. Okay, so we got red.
But it did change. It did change.
Here, let me try. I'm gonna try green myself.
Yay!
And there it is. That's incredible. And you're able to do all of this without without a server, right? No. And that's pretty cool. And the previous one that you showed, that was real time, like was it server to client, client to server communication, or which direction?
Client to client. It was client to client. They have a specific way of explaining how their architecture is going, but I would be terrible at explaining it because I looked into that like a few months ago. I wouldn't remember exactly how they talk about it, but yeah, it's croquet.io if you want to read more about it. There's a few different tools. There's one called Live Blocks and Spinelli, or I forgot how to say it. Yeah, Sneepily. Well, I can share the links later as well. But there's more and more tools that look into real-time experiences on the JamStack because I think historically it's more of like you needed a server and now you don't. So now some companies are like, well, if it means that front-end developers don't need like extra skills to build that kind of real-time experiences, then there's an opportunity there. So at first I only knew Croquet, but then, Live Blocks started and now there's Sneepily, and I'm like, oh, maybe there's something there that people think is interesting. So I'm really excited to see what people are going to build with that, definitely.
That's incredible. It really does seem like now all developers to a certain extent kind of are back-end developers. What are the back-end developers supposed to do? Are they supposed to build the technologies that power these things now? They're just kind of out of a job when it comes to...
They're supposed to keep us out of trouble. I think your typical JamStack developer isn't super well versed in things like database reliability and normalization and things like that. There's still a home for everyone in this universe, which I think is definitely something that is also often underemphasized. But having really good APIs is a big part of this process too.
Absolutely. And, I guess one of the things I've kind of wondered about JamStack is like, what does security look like? What does it look like to secure a JamStack application? Because if it's like if it's just like files, right? Static files, that seems like certain things you don't have to worry about. So I remember I used Flask a lot. And I would use Jinja templates. And one of the things you always got to worry about is someone doing something weird with your Jinja templates, right? What's it like to secure a JamStack application? What things do y'all think about when you're building an app? If you're thinking about that type of stuff at all, since it seems like you just need to.
Well, I was about to say that. I mean, for better or worse, I never really had to think about it, but maybe I should have. But I think it's as you rely on APIs, you can rely on the third-party services you're using to handle their own security, and you build your app like you have to think about it a bit less because you're consuming other people's products, so you can trust that they're securing their services. But also, as assets are pre-generated and just like served, pre-compiled, then you have less attack vectors. So personally, and then, if you're using a framework, they're also kind of handling security on the JavaScript side for you. So sometimes I'm not that much of a fan that we don't have to think about it anymore. But I guess in terms of speed and productivity, you kind of gain a bit like in that sense because you have to think about it a bit less. But then, it's if you trust the third party that you're using as well. I hope that they think about security. Yeah. Mike, I don't know if you have like a different experience. No?
Yeah, it's one of those classical double-edged swords where things get a bit easier. And because of that, it also makes it far easier to miss what you don't know. So I always say that leaning on the experience of experts is a good idea, particularly for things like security. It's a good idea. One of the inherent things in most of the platforms that do hosting, maybe all of the platforms that do hosting for JamStack stuff out of the box, pretty much they'll all spin you up a site that has a TLS certificate and is served over HTTPS, which 5 years ago, that was a thing that was like, you're going to have to invest some money every year in this. And, for a little side project, that wasn't possible. So on one level, that's really nice. You get HTTPS virtually for free with just about every one of these. But there's also, because of the API side of this thing, you can lean on well-known sort of thoughtful APIs in the companies that build them and the smart people in charge of the security to provide authentication through something like Firebase or Auth0 or logging in with LinkedIn or Facebook or GitHub or whatever your application needs. There's also services that do things like privacy APIs. I was chatting with a friend a couple weeks ago, works at a company called Skyflow. They are a privacy first API, which will tokenize your data that needs to be tokenized for privacy so that you're never actually sending any PII over the server. There are ways to do that, but some of it is kind of that you have to know what to do and what not to do. In the code I shared not long ago on this stream, I showed our form for submitting to Airtable. It's also very easy to commit all of this stuff to my GitHub repo that happens to be open. That would give you all the information you need to suddenly send or delete all the data from my Airtable. And you only know that if you know that, and you only have that understanding once you've maybe lived through some pain or seen someone else live through that pain. And so a bit of it is making sure that you're paying attention and also like reaching out and helping people when you see opportunities for vulnerabilities in their stuff or whatever the case may be. So a long answer to your question, Charles, but I think most of the same problems tend to exist. And the solutions might be a little bit different, but often they're pre-packaged in something that saves a lot of time and leans on the expertise of hopefully way smarter than me engineering teams that work on privacy and security and things like that.
And do either of y'all have like a preferred JamStack stack?
I use quite a few of them. Yeah. I've used quite a few different ones for different projects, kind of depending on the need. I mentioned the APIs You Won't Hate site before was built in Gatsby. It's now built in Next. My personal site is built in Next.js. Was also built in Gatsby in the past. I have other sites that I've built with a framework called Remix. And I kind of change around the things that I plug in because I want to expose myself to various tools and try different frameworks out there. There are a lot of, I don't think we've even talked about this at all, but there are a lot of CMSs that plug into JamStack sites, which will let you do things like do the developer integration work so that someone who's not a developer can go and edit the content on a site without having to ever know what a commit or a pull request is. And so I've used quite a few of those. One called Take Shape. I've used Sanity. I've used weird homegrown things that come from Airtables and this and that. So all kinds of options. And in my case, I think I've landed on Next and Remix are the ones that I've been using the most recently. But that's just a recency bias. It's not necessarily a favorite for one way or the other. Charlie, what about you?
I've tried a lot of different stuff. I think there's still a lot that I would like to try that I haven't. But yeah, I think I've used Gatsby, React, Next. I've tried a little bit of Astro. I've tried Solid.js. But I think that when I want to test something quickly, I always fall back to vanilla JavaScript. Like I am a fan of just like normal standard JavaScript because to me, when I just want to try something quickly, I don't have to worry about setting up like Babel or Webpack or anything. So again, it depends on what I'm trying. But if I want to try an API and just ping it like using like Fetch, then I don't need to set up a brand new site with a framework or anything. Usually, if I do want to try something with a framework, I fall back on using Create Next app or Create React app to get started quickly as well. But yeah, I don't think I would have like a favorite. There's definitely some that I like less, but let's not talk about these ones.
Oh, that's my favorite conversation.
I don't want to start a fight. Yeah.
What's your least? No, they're all open source and they're all great.
Yeah.
That's super cool. So you're a very big fan of like vanilla JavaScript when it comes to that stuff. I'm a big fan of not having to have a build tool or build processes. So have you ever tried Parcel? This is kind of a tangent. Have you ever tried Parcel?
I have a little bit, but on side projects. So it was never for an actual like big production thing.
You might
I have not. No, I haven't tried it.
It's like it just works. Like there's like no configuration or really anything like that. You just install it and it just kind of does its thing.
That's a great slogan.
Yeah,
It just works.
It just works. It just does its thing. Yeah, I came across it in a React course on Front End Masters, and I thought it was really cool. Yeah, so I did try, based on this dev chat that we're having, I did try 11D. It was interesting. It was a very interesting writing things with Markdown. But one thing that I thought was really cool, and I wonder if there's any any relationship between this and just like the JamStack, was I came across this really cool framework that I just can't stop talking about because it's super cool to me.
I know the one you're gonna mention.
You know what I'm gonna say, because I gotta say it. I'm like such a big fan, and I'm wondering if y'all have ever tried it out. It's called Alpine.js. I think I'm sharing my screen. I can't see my screen as I'm sharing.
You are.
Okay, cool. It's called Alpine.js. It's like jQuery, and I guess the reason I like it is because it reminds me of the framework that I tend to use the most. And I'll just say I have a favorite. I use Vue.js all the time. It has directives that look a lot like Vue.js, and I don't know. I've been playing around with this one a lot just because, like you, Charlie, I don't like build processes. I don't want to have to do a bunch of stuff. I just like to have like my file and just start doing things.
Yeah.
And this lets me do that. So I don't know. Quick plug, I guess, for Alpine.js to you, Charlie, and Mike, just everybody on the stream.
I'm already convinced. You told me enough already.
Cool.
Yeah, now all I need is a silly idea to go and build something. I feel like those are generally the two things that get me spun up on a project that takes days away from my life, you know?
Totally. So, shoot, I mean, let's see here. We've already talked about so much. We learned how to control Charlie's lights from the internet, which did not know that was. I just thought it was a really nice decoration, Charlie. I didn't know I could just change this to just green. So for anyone who's just tuning in, we have the ability to use, with the power of the internet, to change Charlie's lights.
Once the stream is off, it's over. I'm cutting everything. So
probably for the best.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So I guess I'll ask the audience, like, if you've built JamStack applications, what's your preferred JamStack stack? Who's your preferred, provider, if you happen to use a provider? I think I'm pretty partial to Cloudflare at this point. And it might be a recency bias that because we had someone from Cloudflare come on, and I also just see them always shipping things. Like I think they shipped a distributed SQLite, which just seems amazing to me. As someone who likes, yeah, I really like SQLite. So distributed SQLite on the edge, of course. Take that every time.
Even better, yeah.
Yeah, everything's better on the edge.
That's right.
Incredible. But I mean, we've done the thing. I don't have anything more to say unless y'all have something more to share.
No, that's great. I would say if you've built anything on the JamStack that you want to share, like we're all on Twitter. You can chase us down there. We'd love to see what you're building, what you're thinking about. We're always happy to talk about how to integrate Stripe into your this and that. But today we're nerding out on JamStack. But yeah, no, I don't think I have anything else to add, Charles.
Awesome. Well, Charlie, Mike, thank y'all so much for sharing all of your knowledge and things you built with JamStack. I think I speak for everyone who's watching that I've learned a ton about JamStack, and I don't know. I guess I'm also going to try and change Charlie's lights because it seems like people are still doing that. Let's set it back to purple. Went back to green.
A few minutes left.
But yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of this information, knowledge, and tune in to the next dev chat. It's going to be in 2 weeks. Thank you all for joining. Have a great one.
Thank you.
See ya.